What's up guys, this is Scher talking. Welcome back to my channel. On today's video, I'll be making a full review for the Romancing Festival 7 Heroes banner. They bring 7 different heroes with 7% drop rates. Wagnas, a counter tank, Noel, a damage dealer but also defense booster and buff breaker. Rocbouquet, damage dealer for lightning and shadow. Bokhohn, a buffer for single target. Dantarg, a damage dealer, blunt specialist and leader. Subier, cold and pierce damage dealer that also increases cold damage in Kzinssie, an AOE Buffer and Buffer. Moving on to rs.xyz website, let's start with Wagnas. As you can see, very good status distribution. He's a hybrid but does not suffer much from being one. 120% endurance and will is more than enough to be a tank. Then he has 120% SGR and intelligence for damage. Not the highest we could have seen, but it's okay. We have to remember that counter tanks don't always have very high status. For example, Fire Emperor having 116 SGR, Faye having higher because she's not really a counter, she's just a revenge type damage dealer. And Julian, for example, another very good example of not needing too much offensive. Now, back to Wagnas. We have similar status for dexterity and agility. It's not really needed since he actually has fast skills. Moving on, this character has 40% damage reduction at all times, alongside another 40% damage reduction at resisting. So, two different layers, one guaranteed, the other one needs to resist. Then we have 30% damage increase at all times, 37% chance to evade resisted attacks. He starts the fight with 12 VP. When he attacks, he grants all surviving allies an attack boost that improves damage by 10%, lasts for 2 turns and stacks. On overdrive attacks, he also has another layer, this time it's 15% attack boost. And when on overdrive, you're going to get both. And when he is attacked, he grants all surviving allies a defense boost that increases damage taken by 10% for 1 turn only. He also gets 45 points of OG Gauge by the end of a turn. But now, what about this defense boost? This is the same thing that we had with Joe. But Joe had higher values. Of course, December Joe had Flame Bound. It's really useful. As you can see, defense boost on her case is medium. And when people are hit, they trigger this effect. Well, in her case, it's good because anyone that gets hit will trigger, and that works. Then we got Hilda, that needed herself to be triggered, but she was not a counter specialist. She was just there soaking damage. And then, now, we got Hawk. Hawk has the best type, but he's not a counter unit. He can counter via Militant Slash, but it's not his main gameplay, and he gives you defense boost for 2 turns. He's the best one for this type of strategy. But now we have a little bit of everything with Wagnas. He can improve the defense of your squad just by taking hits, but every new turn you start from scratch. Your defense boost will actually be better if the enemy attacks multiple times. On the start of a turn, he enters Taunt Stance, medium effect for 4 turns, and then puts all surviving allies into stealth stance. That will be the best type of taunt in the game. That started with Julian, best taunter in the game. And then his version had 2 turns of taunt, as you can see, and 2 turns of stealth. So by turn 2 you already had the max potential. But taunt was small value, and then Emperor and Faye have the better version that can reach medium taunt for 4 turns. So on turn 4, higher values than Julian was on turn 2. Much higher though. But the thing is, Julian can actually stack 2 different taunts, one for inheritance if you got both of his styles. But Wagnas has the best type, just like Emperor and Faye. Besides, when he lands an attack, he gets 1 BP. Very important because he needs a lot of BP to use his skills. Now, when attacking on overdrive, he will chase with 2 different counter attacks, but more about that later. Let's go for skill 1. Glitter Shell plus a single target attack, E-Power Pierce, but it casts Guard Up medium for 2 turns. The curse damage taken by 25% does not stack. Then we have 2 different skills. then are physical or magical. That's why he's in hybrid. He needs a spear with the fire element. We have 2 in the game. We have 2 different attacks. Both have double S power. Both are fast. And then he will attack a single target. And then after attacking, he is going to enter a counter stance. And this counter stance will nullify either pierce or heat, because he can choose to counter with heat or pierce. And then actually the heat attack is Rising Flame when countering. Rising Flame is triple S power. And the pierce attack is Javelin plus double S power, a little weaker. But for example, if you want to use him for Megalith Dragon, where the enemy will be weak to everything, it's better to counter with Rising Flame. Unless you have, I don't know, someone improving pierce damage specifically. But 12 BP for any of those casts. Okay, so he will recover 1 BP as soon as he attacks, because he gets 1 BP by attacking. And then he enters his counter stance for 2 turns. It's limited. But that's not really a bad thing, because if you have very strong BP batteries, you can actually use this skill one after another, and then he's going to counter twice by itself. But remember that I said that he has something on overdrive? Okay, so on overdrive, if you are using a skill attack, he also gives another counter stance for 2 turns. And this will also grant him a defense boost that will decrease damage taken by 20%, lasts for 2 turns and stacks. In the case of a spell attack, he would then use counter stance as well, and counter attack with Rising Flame. So you don't get a new attack, you just get another counter stance. So theoretically, Wagnas can actually counter 4 times if you manage to use overdrive, then use your skill here. In this case could be, for example, the second one, and then you enter the counter stance twice, one via the skill, the other via the overdrive effect, and then by the end of that turn you get to overdrive, so that on turn 2 you are on overdrive again, and then you do the same thing. 4 counter attacks of either double S power pierce damage or triple S power heat damage. Pretty strong. Well, that is unrealistic though. I believe it's much easier to say that he will get into 3 counters. Why? Because then 12 BP is not so easy to get. You can, for example, use Flying Spear Maneuver on overdrive turn 1, and then on turn 2 you can use Glitter Shell if you want to keep up with the pierce counter setup. And then you can use Spell, preferably one that is cheap on overdrive, to still get the counter stance for 3 counters. The best option would have been Flame Trio. This is a free single target hit attack that also buffs all surviving allies intelligence by 25%. It comes from his latest style before this one. If you don't have this one, there is this another that you can get from a selector right now, and it has Fire Arrows Plus. That is heat and pierce damage for free. Not as good as Flame Trio, but it's also free. It's probably the best type of inheritance you can get with this guy. You could say that Kaleidoscope of Butterflies is interesting because this one will allow him to just do more on overdrive attacks, like give OG Gouge and also attack boost, but he does not have chase attacks to actually multiply this by a lot. He also has lots of skills that have ailments for old remembrance fights, and that's it. Okay, even though Wagnas may have some BP generation problems, if the enemy attacks him multiple times and he gets to counter even 4 times, it's 4 BP when that happens. Because of course, you're gonna get it from his passive. And that actually makes him much easier to sustain on fights where he counters a lot. Also, each time he counters with Javelin Plus, he gets 20 points of OG Gouge. So 4 counters already gives him 80. And Rising Flame gives 15, so 4 counters will be 60 points. Of course, this is the best case scenario, and that doesn't happen all the time. But he is now the best counter specialist for some fights. His damage is way higher than Julian, for example. but it also depends on boss behavior. And if you skip it, Emperor, well, latest Emperor is another very strong one. He even has higher endurance and will, but there's a difference. Final Emperor buffs different status when he is countering, like endurance and will, but does not buff defense boost, while Wagnas can buff defense boost. It is actually a very good combination, and since he is rivaling the best Final Emperor, and he is usually better than Julian, I would say that Wagnas is probably a 5 out of 5 in my new grading system. And the best one, if you don't have a strong counter, he works for a long while. Moving on, next character is Noel. You can see 120% endurance and will as well, 125% SGR, and only 96% agility. Well, could have been higher, I'll explain why. Moving for state of battle, we will fill all overdrive gauges. That's actually pretty interesting. He then also grants all surviving allies 1 merciful heart and 1 power to connect. Both will last for 2 turns, but just focus on what these things can do. For example, the merciful heart will allow everyone when attacking to grant all allies. So 1 character trigger this 1 time. So a max of 5 triggers. Weak attack boost, that will increase weak damage by 15%, only lasts for 1 turn. And then resist defense boost. This will decrease the damage from resisted attacks by 10%. So only 1 turn as well. You have to attack before the enemy in order for this to actually work. The defense boost part is much better, because if your characters are fast and they attack before the enemy, you're going to have 5 stacks of 10%. Now about the weak attack boost, the first character to attack actually does not get anything, and then the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth will get more. So actually the first one to attack, if it has multiple changes, will get at least 15%. Now about power to connect, it's just the same thing again, but triggers on overdrive. And it improves the values. For example, it is 20% attack boost for weak attacks, and then a 20% resist defense. And both are still for 1 turn only. Now, when you are on overdrive, you're gonna trigger all of these effects. So 15 plus 20 for actually 35% weak attack boost, and then 10% and a 20% defense boost. On overdrive, you're gonna get a lot of things. This character has even more on overdrive. He activates Gloom Dancing Blade. This is a very interesting attack. You can see here, 4S power, Slash and Shadow will recover all surviving allies HP by around 1,500, and then will grant himself 2 stacks of Life Drain Seal. Life Drain Seal is imperfect chase that may or not happen, have 50% chance to, on the next attack. Okay, Life Drain Sword is his skill from a passive style, single target Slash and Shadow 2, that will recover his HP by around 300 and buff Endurance and Will by 15% because it's rank 1. It is nice to trigger some effects from passives that trigger from older characters though. He also always chases with his attack, so at least 1 chase, and another one on overdrive. When attacking, he also always triggers an attack boost of 15% for all surviving allies, this time for 2 turns, so it's easier to have the benefits, and also a defense boost of 10% for all allies, and you're going to stack this. Also, remember that when landing an attack, it triggers once. Only 1 effect. The chase attack Life Drain Sword will not trigger an additional effect. So, when you attack on overdrive, you also get another effect. Actually, double times, much like his other mechanic. The attack boost will then be 20%. The defense boost will be 20% too. So just from this alone, if you're attacking on overdrive, you're gonna get a 15% and then a 20% attack boost for 2 turns. This stacks, it's better because it passes on the next turn, and a defense boost of 10% and another of 20%. So pretty nice, and it does help people get into overdrive. because he gives 15 points for everyone. He also already fully charges OG Gosh for everyone on start, so you're gonna have all the effects on the start of the fight. There's also another attack boost of 15%, this one just for one turn for everyone every single turn. He's a 5p per turn character and also improves overdrive damage for everyone 20% 3 times, so on turn 3, 60% for everyone. He has intrinsic, so that is a 40% damage increase at all times. So that is a 30% damage increase at all times. Reduces damage taken by 40 when resisting, and then has a 37% chance to evade resisted attacks. So you need to equip him well. He doesn't have any damage reduction if he does not resist, besides all of the defense boosts that you can already have. Still pretty defensive, he's not going to take much damage, and he can provide you with a lot of support. Moving on, he has skill number 1, Evil Grudge, single target slash and shadow, can also poison for Carmine. This is nice because it's free, he's only going to land poison on Carmine because of a very poor intelligence. Second skill is Subspace Slash. For 5 EP, he always have 5 EP available. Single target slash and shadow attack with 8 power and buff breaks the enemy. Well, single target, it's okay, but for 7 EP we also have Paulus that has an AOE, so I hope at him to have either even cheaper or, I don't know, AOE. But it works since most challenges is just about one boss anyway. Skill 3 is Evil Aura Blade. It's fast, single target, and then slash and shadow. Before attacking, grants all surviving allies Merciful Heart and Power to Connect one time for 5 turns. Why? Because the Merciful Heart and Power to Connect that we saw in the start of the fight is just for one trigger. When they are triggered, you lose it. Interesting thing about Power to Connect that triggers on overdrives, that the one that you start the fight with lasts for 2 turns, but you're going to use overdrive on turn 1, right? But the skill-based one lasts for 5 turns, meaning that even if you don't get into overdrive too fast, you can actually use Evil Aura Blade on the next turn, and then they will have this for 2 triggers. And then, on attacking on overdrive, double effects. But Merciful Heart has to be used right when you trigger it. Because, look, it is something that will trigger as soon as you attack. And it doesn't matter if it's overdrive or not. The skill itself is pretty weak, just as power. So, Noel is not made for damage, but he can reach high damage potential if you have status buffers, because he already have a lot of attack boosts anyway. You can also use some inheritances. In his case, he benefits from Gloom Dancing Blade, if you want, because then you're gonna heal twice. It's going to heal 1,500 at least twice. It's from 0 to max easily. You could theoretically also inherit Swordmaster Stance from latest style to get into overdrive 2 times in a row and recovering 5 VP. But I don't know. You should be switching between Swordmaster Stance and then skill 3. At least it provides you with enough VP. And besides that, I don't think there's anything else you would actually want to use, because he has a free skill already, unless you want to use Autumn Slash, that is just slash and can buff STR when you don't need to use skill 3. With all that said, he's a character that works by himself. There is no need of inheritance, and he just helps parties do more damage, resist damage further, and he can also buff break, something that is usually very useful in this game. We also have Katarina for Remembrance that also provides a lot of support. Together with Noel, they make a very good defensive and offensive support squad that will make your Remembrance fights easier. But Noel is not made for Remembrance only. He can actually be used in any hard fight with ease. You cannot really see him before playing with him, because there are plenty of attack and defense boosts happening, but he should be considered a secondary defense booster. You still prefer to have yet a second one, that will be probably the main one, to provide long-term defense boosts. His ones last for only 1 or 2 turns, even though those can stack. Sometimes you have lower values if you're not attacking on overdrive, and that can actually lead to your defeat. but Noel fits into squads where you were searching for a buff breaker with added value. He is your man. Very useful, and 4.5 out of 5. Next one should be Rocbouquet, and she has 100% endurance and will. Those values are now pretty standard, nothing special, very low will even for a mage in my opinion. She's a nuker with 135% intelligence but just 95% agility. That's because she's kind of a hybrid. She has high dexterity to inherit S's word skills. Now, on the start of a fight, she fills her overdrive gauge to max and starts with 13 BP to use her strongest attack, but you actually want to use skill 2 first, but more about that later. If on the start of a turn her overdrive gauge is full, she then gets an attack boost that will improve her damage output by 50%, lasts for 3 turns and stacks. But if it's not full, she then has a 50% chance to trigger an effect that will then fully charge overdrive gauge for 3 turns straight. That's nice because if it triggers on turn 1, you were already on overdrive, and then it triggers, you're gonna have overdrive for 3 turns straight, and then you're gonna have 3 turns of this 50% attack boost, improve her damage by quite a lot. When attacking on overdrive, she's gonna chase with Umbra Levin. That is double S power attack that buffs her intelligence by 20%, lightning and shadow damage as well. Now, after chasing with Umbra Levin, she would then chase with Gravity Orb. Gravity Orb is much stronger. It is a 4S power attack with shadow and lightning, and one that has a very high mod too. Okay, so her chases only happen on overdrive, so she has to play a little bit with RNG, but every end of turn you have 50% chance to have this effect to trigger OG all the time. On the start of a turn, she gets this over enhance that will improve her overdrive damage by 50%, max of 3 times, means 150% damage increase on overdrive, again relying too much on OG. When ending an attack, she gets 2 BP, and that is interesting because on overdrive she's going to attack multiple times, but on non-overdrive turns it's at least 5. She also gets an attack boost that improves damage by 10%, lasts for 2 turns stacks multiple times, and buffs intelligence by 5%. Well, this part here is from an old passive alongside over enhance, that's pretty okay. She always have 20% damage increase, and then she has 40% on combo, 40% on overdrive, so a total of 100 when attacking on overdrive, alongside a 30% damage reduction at all times. So enough to survive. A little squishy, but she's a nuker, kinda makes sense. Moving forward, skill 1, Dark Bolt Shot, is a free spell that doesn't do much damage, but it avoids you a need to use bonk attack. Second skill, Chaos Spark, it's pretty crazy. It's fast, single target, Shadow and Lightning can only be used once per battle, and it will apply weak marker for Shadow and Lightning defenses. So, the difference here is that it has a small effect and lasts for 2 turns when you start attacking. We have weak marks that have medium effect. Those will debuff the enemy defenses by actually 20%, but hers only reach 15% if I'm not mistaken. But her attacks have both Shadow and Lightning, so it actually goes both ways. And if you are using her on a Lightning squad, she works, and if you are using her on a Shadow squad, she also works. Then skill 3 is Fulminant Sphere. That is a single target attack, Lightning and Shadow. As you can see, she uses both Shadow and Water spells. She requires a special staff that can be easily upgraded right now. And before attacking, she grants herself extra force. This will improve her final damage output by 50%. Let's say that after everything's accounted for, she was supposed to do 1 million damage. She would then do 1.5 million damage. This is a new type of way to improve your damage that we're not going to see on all characters, but when we do, it's pretty powerful. 13 BP, and it says triple S power, but this is, well, just a number. It actually does explosive damage. And if it's on overdrive right after you use this extra force, it's gonna benefit the damage of Umbra Levin Plus and also Gravity Orb. It's actually preferable to not use URBP all the time. So, for example, you didn't get overdrive, use Dark Bolt Shot. You got into overdrive, use all of your BP for Fulminant Sphere. But there's something else with this Rocbouquet. She can also inherit from her latest bunny style, Lightning Barrage. This is a double S power attack that can only use it once and gives a heat up of 50% damage improvement. And then Recharge. Recharge gives her 15 points of OG Gotcha. It doesn't really fit this design because she either goes full or not, but it gives yet another chase attack. Darkness Bolt. It is Shadow and Lightning attack with B damage. Not really that powerful, but it debuffs the enemy will by 15% with a chance. Actually, 10% if it's used as a chase. And then buffs her intelligence by 15%. So it improves her damage, and the more attacks you do after using that extra force, the better. She will work super well with two characters that we have. Madeline. Madeline is very good because she already has the lightning weak point. Both will provide support for Kzinssie. Of course, she hits, well, 24 times with lightning damage. Rock will be replacing Khalid on lightning damage squads. You could theoretically use 4 together, but, well, you need something like Hannah to block damage for 2 turns and only attack for 3. Use 0 overdrive for turn 3. And she also works super well with Sarun, of course, because Sarun will give her shadow damage improvement, and she will also receive more BP because of the Chain of Grudge passive. It's a little harder to make shadow squads than it is to make lightning or even cold squads right now, but Rocbouquet already, by helping out do more damage with Kzinssie, already has a reason to exist. Kzinssie is the strongest damage dealer in the game and won't be easily power creeped anyway. There are other inheritance that you could theoretically use. Captive Thunder triggers Crazy Love that would then give 3 times attack boost of 10%. I don't think this is good, but you could use her for morale down in turns where she's not overdriving, for example. Blue Rose Road can help you with that. And there is also stuff like Cycle Boom that can help you debuff, but then it decreases her damage output by a lot. Or stuff like Lightning of Darkness if you want to debuff all status and also applies attack down. But if you actually want to use those things, you're better off using debuffer versions of Rocbouquet and not this one that is actually a damage dealer. I suggest you to find this type of utility, debuffing, on other characters. Rock can also use Dark Wash Plus from her S style, and she becomes a buff breaker, but it decreases her damage output by quite a lot. She still does okay in allowing other shadow and lightning damage dealers to do more. Another thing about Rocbouquet is that you may think she will not have enough BP to keep using Fullman Sphera, but actually, remember that she gets 2 BP when she attacks. On overdrive, she will get 9 BP. And if you are using her inheritance from Lightning Barrage, you're then gonna get 11 BP. She needs 13 in order to keep nuking every single turn on overdrive. And even if that happens, you will only need 2 BP points. It can come from someone like Leon, for example. And that will allow her to nuke the enemy non-stop. Rocbouquet will help you finish fights faster and provide you a lot of damage. She's a very good character. I would say another 4.5 because she provides damage and speeds up fights, and is very useful if you have the lightning version of Kzinssie and Madeline. Moving on, we have Subier, and this guy here is actually interesting, but much better than Glow because of our 4 news. 126% SGR is not really that high, 110% endurance is just a little above the average, with 105% agility that needs to be fast since he wants to use a fast skill before other attackers. Now, he starts the fight with 15 BP and fills all of his overdrive gauge and grants himself Ocean Pursuit, permanent in battle. When he attacks, he's going to chase 2 times with Water Javelin. That is his first skill. Water Javelin is a single target pierce and cold attack that on chase will grant the target pierce defense down for 10% and cold defense down for 10%. When used as a command, it debuffs by 15% instead. Lasts for 2 turn stacks, and most of his attacks have double element, but not always for pierce, always for cold only. Then you also have Ocean Vortex Spear when attacking on overdrive. That is triple S power attack that also applies the pierce and cold defense down, but only 30% volley for each. We also have 20% damage increase for cold attacks, and then 40% for all attacks, meaning 60% total. When landing cold attacks recovers BP by 2. We have 2 chases, that means that we will get 9 BP on non-overdrive turns and 11 BP on overdrive turns. Then we reduce damage taken at all times by 30% and by another 25% if we resist. Skill number 1 we already discussed it, Water Javelin. It's the one that we chase 2 times. And the second one, Piercing Bubbles. It's fast, single target, pierce and cold. Can be used twice per battle. And before attacking, grants all enemies the weak point that would decrease the cold resistance when you use cold attacks. Well, much like Madeline and even Rock, but here we'll be debuffing the enemy defense by 20%, lasts for 2 turns, and it will stack. Then, grant all surviving allies elemental attack blessings. When they attack with cold attacks, they will grant themselves a defense boost that decreases damage taken by 10%, lasts for 2 turns, and stack. It does not say any limit, so I believe if your character has multiple chase attacks, it's going to trigger multiple times. Like in the case of Subier. He's going to get 3 defense boosts on normal turns and 4 defense boosts on overdrive, so he can become pretty defensive. The skill costs 3 BP, only does B damage, so actually in the start he's providing more support than damage himself. But if you have Kihachi cold style, you are pretty much set. Kihachi already has good synergy with Subier, so if you use her 8-fold wall blade, then 3 times means 3 defense boosts, and you are already hitting the enemy 24 times to decrease the cold resistance 20% with each hit. Yeah, her damage is skyrockets super fast with help of Subier. Besides, he will also work well with Therese. That is still a very good character because she deals pierce and cold damage and also buffs endurance and will. She takes time to build though. Also works well with Silver because she attacks with cold but also with lightning, so it's not for all of her attacks. And then with Sif, I would say she's still a strong damage dealer, and she also provides defense down to the enemy when attacking, so it will work both ways. So Subier is not really that strong himself, but provides enough support to help. Besides, the third skill is Tentacle Slam. It's single target, blunt and cold. Strange because he's decreasing the enemy resistance to pierce, not blunt. But at least the cold part works. It attacks 8 times with E power. Well, pretty much like Kihachi's skill, but without the extra chase mechanic that hits another 8 times and then yet another 8 times. Tentacle Slam is gonna do very good damage. And once you use it, you're going to recharge the usage of Piercing Bubbles. The skill number 2. So, I already said that he gets a lot of PP. Gets 9 and then 11, so a total of 20. He can easily cycle between Piercing Bubbles and Tentacle Slam. You're gonna start the fight probably using Piercing Bubbles, then Tentacle Slam, and then keep this cycle. If you are using Kihachi, then just before you nuke the boss to kill it, you can actually use Piercing Bubbles twice. Because this way, you're gonna have more weak points, and then Kihachi is going to do even more damage and finish the enemy, right? Well, Subier works by itself and does not need inheritance. Even the latest style that has that skill called Tidal Spear that attacks with 8 power and then grants a chase for overdrive does not really work all that well. Because you would be skipping the second skill Piercing Bubbles in that case. Or you could use Piercing Bubbles and then Tidal Spear. But then you lose the 8 hit attack. The good thing is that then you keep the pierce and cold defense down. And when you use your Tidal Spear, the chase attack that you get extra is super strong. It says triple S power, but in all reality you can see it doing a lot of damage when using multiple times. You could use it, for example, 4 times, and then on turn 5 you could actually use the second skill of Subier to see if it does more damage. I don't know if it does. I am unsure about that situation. But in that case, he is a damage dealer for 3 damage types. If you want Blunt, use Tentacle Slant. If you want Pierce, you can use Tidal Spear. And like I said on the start of the review, Subier is much better because of 4 News. 4 News latest style is amazing because he gives a lot of effects for those that use cold attacks. They can get BP, apply defense boost to the party, and they can also apply cold attack boost with each attack with no limit, meaning that Subier will be improving cold damage to the party 3 times by 45% each, and then on overdrive even 4 times, while self-buffing and getting even extra damage from cold via 4 News passive. Right now, a combination of 4 News, Therese, Kihachi, and Subier will do a lot of damage while still having support, and you can decide about your 5th character. Subier will receive only a 4 out of 5 because he does rely too much on other characters to actually do enough damage, and he is not all that strong by himself. Moving on, we have Dantarg. This guy here has 125% STR and agility, and they could have been even higher. It would help. 110% endurance, just a little more than the average levels, and he does have dexterity because he can inherit other physical spear attacks. Moving on, starts the fight with 13 BP because he has 13 BP attack, and then he increases the BP gauge of everyone by 5 points, but he does not charge. Then he grants all surviving allies 50% damage increase for blunt attacks. Also, on the start of every turn, he will give Forging Fists. If you use blunt attacks, you recover 4 BP to yourself, and also triggers 25 points of OG gauge in the end of a turn and gives it to another random surviving ally. So if you have a 5 character squad that use blunt, they will all get 4 extra BP, 25 points of extra OG gauge, and then another 25 multiplied by 5 that will be shared among them all. Let's say that you can actually get 1 character to overdrive because of this. But it gets out of hand, you don't know who's going to get the extra random surviving ally effect. He then also has Heat Up Scuffle. This is just for one of his skills, but it's the best one. It will improve 50% damage for this skill and triggers up to 10 times. Yes, it takes 10 times for him to improve his Scuffle damage to the limit, but it's a 500% damage increase. By the end of a turn, he gets 35 points of OG gauge, so it is pretty easy to get him to overdrive if you are using many blunt attackers. Now when attacking, he grants himself an attack boost that improves damage by 20%, lasts for 2 turns and stacks. Will also buff STR, endurance, agility, and will by 15%. Then on overdrive attacks, he's going to trigger both, so you're gonna get a 50% attack boost, and then buff your status by as much as 35%. Now when attacking, he always changes with full power destructive fist. This is actually a double S power attack. It has just blunt damage, and it will give you a 25% attack boost as a chase, and then also a defense boost that decreases damage taken by 35% for 2 turns and stacks. This is nice to have a defense boost when you are attacking, so you can stack 2 and receive very low damage. When attacking on overdrive, he's going to chase again, this time with Scuffle Plus. That is the 3rd attack. This one, before attacking, grants the user an attack boost of extreme effect. This will improve damage by 50%, lasts for 2 turns and stacks, or S power damage. Of course, this will be rank 1, but even then it is a lot of damage, especially because he will be stacking attack boosts and status buffs, and he gets a lot from status buffs. So if you can buff in some fights, Dantarg is going to do explosive damage. Now, when attack damage taken will be reduced by 25%, he also has some other heat ups that will improve damage potential by 75% on turn 5 onwards. Skill number 1 is Bash Plus. It's just a power 3 BP cost attack that is not something you want to use. If you don't have EP, you're better off using just a normal attack even. Then the second one, you already discussed it, it's the Guarantee Chase, that gives attack and defense boost. And then Scuffle Plus, it's the same attack. I actually forgot to say that as a chase it only gives you 40% attack boost, and as a command a 50% boost. So what you want to do is on Overdrive, use Scuffle Plus in order to have better results. Try to get into Overdrive in the next turn as well, so that you have Scuffle Plus 2 times and then 2 times again. This will do a lot of damage, especially if you are on the higher turns, since he's going to keep improving Scuffle damage. Well, it is pretty hard to see the damage potential of the Dantarg, but if you are on a perfect fight and you can buff, you can see 10 million damage on Scuffle alone. He also works well for fights where you should not be using multi-hit attackers, and he has a easiness to get into Overdrive. He also allows everyone to get 4 extra points of BP when using blunt attacks. So everything here helps out make Dantarg good for boss fights. He's not just for Remembrance, he works everywhere. And very easy to use, since there are multiple characters that have blunt damage. You could say that he can help Hana, because Hana needs some extra BP, and he works well even if you have delay. The only problem is that you need to overdrive with Dantarg to reach full damage potential, but maybe you can overdrive with one of your characters to still keep up with Hana passives. Not just Hana, of course, he's going to work well with Michelle, because Michelle applies that weak point blunt defense down. But Michelle is on a very strange banner, so we'll have other characters that will also apply weak point for blunt. And right now, you could also pair him with Tatiana, because Tatiana does need some help with BP, and she is a blunt damage dealer. Leon does not really need help with BP, but also works. And works well with Liza too. Liza needs a lot of BP to keep using her skill number 3, so if you can't actually use 2 damage dealers in your party, okay, you can do that on Remembrance fight too, but then your support needs to be very good, like, for example, Candy. Dantarg damage is insane if you can wait for some turns to build up. He does help the party. There's no need of inheritance, although it can actually use that Conflagration Lance Rush for 5 hits of pierce and heat damage. And that does not have blunt, so it gets worse for BP generation. So I suggest you to kind of forget, unless you want to use Knockout Plus. That is an AOE S power attack. This could be useful if we are talking about some Remembrance fights where there are multiple enemies, but he's better off attacking single targets with his main mechanic. Dantarg is strong and provides some support, and I believe he deserves a 4.5 out of 5. Next one will be Bokhohn, and he is a very strange character. 115% endurance and will, good. 100% SGR and agility. Nothing else here really matters. This guy barely attacks, if ever. Starts with 12 BP, and then gets 2 BP every turn for a total of 5. Also provides a 15% attack boost every turn, and also a 10% hit up, so he's going to give you up to 65% damage increase every turn on turn 5 onwards. Reduces damage taken by 50% at all times. Skill number 1 is Sucker Strike Plus, a single target deep power attack that has a chance to debuff the enemy's SGR by 15% on max level. His intelligence is 108%, that is not bad. Then the second skill, Marionette Assist, can only be used once per battle, and this will grant all surviving allies Innervate SGR and Innervate Will. This gives you a 25% chance to debuff SGR and then 25% chance to debuff Will by 15%. It's a guaranteed debuff when it lands. 25% is not reliable, but if you have characters that attack multiple times, like Leon, like Katarina, Tatiana, they will have a new chance to debuff with new attack. Okay, you can actually do it even better. You can give you another type of Innervate via this school that has agility and intelligence debuffs. Those are actually pretty nice, because intelligence will help you avoid being inflicted with ailments and reduce spell damage. Agility reduces MR's damage and decreases speed of the enemy. So you can debuff 4 status via Innervate if you have the inheritance. Will I say that this is reliable? No, it's not, but it can be enough in some fights. Then the skill number 3, it's fast support, one ally. And here we have a lot of crazy effects. For example, a weak attack boost and attack boost each have 50% value. They last for 4 turns, stacks, and you can actually keep casting on the same target if you want. Then a defense boost that will decrease damage taken by 35%, lasts for 4 turns. And then he will feel the overdrive dodge of this target 2 turns. Okay, that's a lot of effects, right? But that's not just that. He then gives a lot more. But you have to use this version of Bokhohn, so inheritances don't make too much sense. He will then give 10 BP by the end of a turn to the target, once. He then gives another attack boost, improving damage by 30% for 4 turns, and a weak attack boost of 15% in 4 turns. So now we have as much as 180 attack boosts, but you need to land weak attacks. Then he buffs SGR Dexterity, Agility, and Intelligence by 35%. This is the only type of status buff that he does. Then grants himself a defense boost that decreases damage taken by 30% for 2 turns. Also, a guard up that will then decrease damage taken by 35, does not stack. And then buffs his own endurance, will, love, and charisma by 35. And then fuse his overdrive dodge by the end of the turn. Okay, so he's buffing defense to stay alive and keep buffing. And this OG feel is so that if you use your skill now to buff your character, it's fast, right? But he may not have enough agility to buff before your character attacks. But then on the next turn, if you are on overdrive, he will still give you a good chance to buff the same target again. You can, and you will do that in some situations, but if you have 2 damage dealers, you actually will get more by switching between them. The good thing is that the 180% attack boost will work all the time. Enemies can remove your status buff, depending on the fight, and the extra 10 BP can also help you keep using your best skills with your main attacker. A lot of different stuff, and does provide very good damage support for real nukers, like, of course, Kzinssie. We always talk about this character, but all other nukers. And he is the best type of buffer for counter units too, because we do have other characters that will help Kzanssie's damage. We talked about them even on this video. But how do you actually buff the damage of Wagnas, for example? Would you have to bring a specific pierce damage booster or a specific hit damage booster? No, you can just bring Bokhohn and buff Wagnas so that Wagnas has better BP generation and keeps countering more and more and more. And it's actually a very viable strategy, especially since Wagnas lacks BP. But he does get when he's attacking, since he can attack up to 4 times, that's 4 BP. Depending on the situation, and it's not really required to use Bokhohn. He's always that type of character that will just improve your results in specific fights. But you can always finish without him. Just speeds up. But there will be some fights where the enemy will get to a point where it becomes too defensive or too offensive, and if you use Bokhohn to shorten the length of the fight, it gives you an easy win. So there's a reason to have this character. This guy is very useful, but also skippable because of how this game works. Eventually you'll get other characters that will buff close to his limit AOE, or will do that attacking. So there's some limits into his own design, and that's why he will eventually get old. Still pretty good, and a 4 out of 5 in my opinion. And then the last one will be Kzinssie, and this one is an odd one. 85% STR just for inheritance because he's full mage now. You're gonna need a sword with the shadow element. 105% endurance and 110% will are also a little more than okay. Agility is 105, he needs very high agility, and 130% intelligence too. Now, he starts the fight with 14 BP to use his best attack. He also recovers HP and BP when attacking, for a total of 5 because he has a chase. Grants himself an attack boost, improving damage potential by 10% for 2 turns and stack, but he does not do damage at all. Buffs his intelligence and agility by 5% when attacking as well. That actually lands 10% since he has a chase. It is to improve his agility to become fast enough to always attack before the enemy. If the enemy self-buffs, this can be a problem. He also has 20% damage increase at all times, and then on the start of a turn, grants himself 15% defense up 5 times per battle, so he eventually becomes good defensively, but starts pretty weak. When you attack, you're gonna chase with Steel Circle. That is the third skill that costs 14 BP as a command. It's an AOE shadow attack with E power. Yes, when the attack hits, so it has to land. If you miss the attack, it's not gonna work. You then debuff the enemy STR, Agility, Intelligence, and Will. So we are only missing on Dexterity here for offensive status. And it debuffs by 30%. That's a big number. And then he will buff all surviving allies. STR, Agility, Intelligence, and Will. Again, lacking Dexterity. This time by 40%. So 40% buff, 30% debuff. Okay, but he chases with his skill as well, right? He does, even if he uses a normal attack. And as a chase, you're going to buff only 30. And you're going to debuff 25%. So if you use Steel Circle and chase with Steel Circle, you can debuff the enemy by 55%, and then you can buff your allies by 70%. This actually helps a ton. And when you think about offensive and defensive buff, you should compare him to Hana. Hana has a good setup where she can buff and debuff with her skill tree. And it's the same values, but for all status. Look, 40% buff, 30% debuff. She always has this problem with her low agility though. The agility of Kzinssie is higher. 94 versus how much? 105%. 11% difference. Can be a big difference depending on the fight. And he self-buffs agility, meaning that if the enemy does not buff break you, it's going to actually be faster. Okay, so if you miss it out on Acelus, for example, or Pole, or then Jamil, Kzinssie is a good option to replace those. But 14 BP for a character that gets 5, it can be a problem. And he needs BP batteries to help keeping up this. Hana may also need BP batteries. Like I said, Dantarg provides almost enough now. And to keep using skill 3. While Kzinssie may need 2 BP batteries to keep using Steel Circle. If you're not using them, your debuff value gets down to lower than 50% total. You could also inherit some stuff to make it easier to debuff. For example, from his last style, there is Sacrifice's Word, an AoE attack as well. And before attacking, those 10% recoil HP damage to allies, and then debuff the enemy's status by 15%, but it does include Dexterity this time, and then activates Psycho Noise. Psycho Noise will then debuff the enemy's Intelligence and Will by 20% on max level. So just from this alone, you're going to debuff Intelligence by up to 35%, alongside 25% from Chase. It gets to 60%. If Intelligence is the main status that you want to debuff, that's cool. You can also inherit Euthanize Plus, that is cheaper. This will debuff Intelligence by 30%, alongside the other 25, making up for 55. If Intelligence is the status that you need to debuff the most, that's good. And then it will also buff Intelligence by 40%, so Kzinssie will do a little more damage. You could also theoretically inherit Dust Steel to use it, and grants damage block for 1 time. And then Vivify 2, that will give you a 25% chance to get 2 BP. Really unnecessary. So it's all about Euthanize or Sacrifice's Word for me. No other inheritance will make much sense, and Sacrifice's Word seems to be better because it does give you 1 extra BP. So it's more like it was 9 BP when compared to Euthanize being 8. Kzinssie, it's a good debuffer. I will not say anything else. When he attacks with Steel Circle as well, he will provide defense down that Decreases the defense of the enemy by 10% for 3 turns and stacks, and also a defense boost of 10% and stacks. Meaning that if you keep up using Steel Circle, you can actually have as much as 6 defense boosts to the party, each of 10%. That is usually enough to be used as a secondary defense booster, not all case scenarios. And the defense down can also provide you with extra damage. Not really all that impactful though. Kzinssie will be useful if you are lacking specialist debuffers, but I wish he had something else or better VP generation. He works now and receives a 4 out of 5. Now, back to the banner image. Is this banner worth summoning for? In my opinion, yes, it is going to receive a Gold Plus award. And because we have 7% drop rates, it's very good to try to summon here and see if you get lucky. The best characters that can be used in all types of content will be Wagnas and Noel. Even if the enemy resists Wagnas damage, depending on your squad, he can still be your main tank. Noel is more about applying effects that does not really need to land weak attacks. The party can, but he himself doesn't. He's just there to provide lots of buffs. So he's also a generalist. Those two characters are considered to be the ones that will be most used. Then Rocbouquet and to an extent Subier are elemental amplifiers, with Rocbouquet being better because she does have 2 different elemental types and her damage output is even better than Subier. But if you have Fornews, then Subier is going to be very useful, and if you have the cold version of Kihachi as well. Then I would say Dantarg is the very strong damage dealer that also provides support, considering those 5 characters to be the best ones. But people are more inclined to say Wagner is the best one, with Noel being the second, in a tie between Rocbouquet and Dantarg, Subier, and then Kzinssie and Bokhohn being the ones a little easier to skip. So decide upon that. If you pull like, I don't know, up to 5 times and get 4 of the heroes, you are pretty much set. You can just decide to stop and, well, use them in your future fights. If you want to go up to a PT, the only ones that are PT worth are Wagner's Noel, Rock, and Dantarg in my opinion. But if you are lacking some type of support, maybe Bokhohn will be good enough for you as well. But that is just my opinion. What is yours? Let's see here in the comment section. I had to skip Kzinssie and Bokhohn because they didn't drop, and I will not go over PT. But, well, I guess I have to accept what I got. Thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't, and if you want to support the channel, there are links in the description. I hope to see you soon on the next one. Goodbye.